2, 1. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, centuries later, the Catholic Church, Christianity, and all of its offshoots, at its core, had Christendom many years ago. Christendom, back then, currently today, and likely in the future, is alive and well and thriving, despite this being quite a dark moment in church history. Make no mistake, right? This debate isn't about the Spanish Inquisition in itself being good or bad, but specifically how it influenced Christendom back then, and how, given that this is a value judgment, taking a look at church history and how these things had led to the reformation of the church and ultimately the evolution of religious, social, and political thought. Because we recognize that yes, to some extent, it was bloody, to some extent, yes, it was coercive, but the rules of the game at that point in time were quite different, and we cannot just assume from the lens of modern day what we would have done at that point in time. Because this really served as a cornerstone of the church to be able to evolve into what we know today. The birth of institutions and the institutionalization of the church and the formalization, even if it happened centuries later, the Vatican and the papacy, that is the seat of the church that ultimately thrived despite these things happening in any kind of religious or social context. During that point in time, given that we were experiencing the Enlightenment to the Renaissance and the entire Protestant Reformation literally paved the way for Protestantism, the Orthodox Church, and all of the offshoots of Christianity to literally thrive, even including things like the Anglican Church with Henry VIII back then. This was only possible because of the Spanish Inquisition. And we think that what happened since the fall of Constantinople, precisely through the birth of the Enlightenment, was ultimately good. A few features on our model which also serve as positive material. Firstly, the Spanish Inquisition was a seminal part of church history, and the evolution of such, just like any kind of religion, 500 years ago, literally had many kinds of different expectations. The expectation of that point in time was to be able to spread Christianity to other kinds of people. That is exactly what happened in the first place. And we were ultimately able to see, despite there being certain religious skirmishes and conflict at that point in time, Christendom was quite successful in terms of being a purveyor of thought and be able to literally give birth to educations like colleges and universities, precisely because these people were educated. Not only were they educated, but they had the military capacity at that time to literally go into war and go into these kinds of things to be able to protect themselves. Meaning, sure, these people had to convert, whether they were Jewish, whether they were Muslim, but in exchange, these people were given some sort of protection. Call it coercive, but at that point in time, these people valued their ability to be able to get food. They valued their ability to literally not get wrecked by the barbarians of that time and not got plunged into further forms of conflict when they had a path. These people had the path to be able to be a soldier under their guard. These people had the path to become an academician or someone part of that university system. These people had the path to be a friar if they wanted to live a life of celibacy and be able to go about proselytizing as a olden time kind of disciple for that particular point in time. Meaning, the goal of this debate is to be able to give a historical evaluation, but also connecting it to what we see today. It's not a regrets motion, it's ultimately an evaluation from the lens of a neutral observer to be able to see what happens. And we understand that these moriscos or these Muslim converts or these particular Jewish converts or the conversos ultimately were caught between a rock and a hard place. These people had no point but to be able to be involved in these particular forms of conflict, and in as much as sure, the modern day retroactive lens of saying, bruh, it's quite dangerous, it's so violent, just like any kind of religion was, right? Let's not pussyfoot around it, whether that be Hinduism, whether that be Islam. Every single religion had some sort of dark history and context, and we think this is not necessarily what had defined them. Why? Because it was particularly successful, especially because they had the military and educational capacity to be able to form and grow particular institutions through the heart of the Christendom, which we think over time has largely evolved and paved the way for the institutionalization to happen over the next hundreds of years, even until now, just like what we've seen with the birth of the Vatican. The birth of the Vatican, yes, happened centuries later, but these seminal incepted ideas were at that point in time when they realized to some extent they fucked up, right? To some extent, using this stick approach to particularly harm and wreck people wasn't the only way to particularly get followers. They've chilled out since then, and they've realized that the path was through the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment, which they saw during the Renaissance, and they started to shift their tactic. Only because they realized it hadn't been that successful allowed them to be able to lead to the birth of legacy institutions like a lot of these religious orders and things we know today. Before 6, I'll take it.
Yeah. So when you try to symmetricize these harms, please note that the fall of Constantinople was not the only tipping point, but then when Jesus came and there was a lot of opportunities for these people to go ahead and spread through other means as well. Those means were particularly not adopted, as OG points out. So
the fall of Constantinople, even if it can still happen, sure, was an important tipping point, but a more valiant and important tipping point was really the Renaissance. And that's the heart of my case, right? Talking to you about the particular institutions and the Reformation that they had only because they realized the shortcomings of the Spanish Inquisition. I'm not saying that fucking war is always completely justified and all of these things were good, but I'm saying that the evolution of church history, as what they've seen then, literally paved the way to seeing the things that we see today. Particularly exercising the agency of people to want to go into Christianity or the majoritarian part at the time, or whether they want to go into some offshoot form of Orthodox or Protestant religion, which we think is quite alive and well today. Ladies and gentlemen, this particular point in time was dark, but it led to the reformation of the church and the institutionalization of how it evolved over time to continue being a social, political, and economic leader in terms of their capacity. We are very proud to stand on side negative.